I never thought the final chapter of my life would begin in a cold, oak-paneled room, surrounded by people I barely recognized anymore. My name is Richard Walker. I'm 72 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I buried my wife of 48 years. The day after her funeral, I sat quietly in our now empty kitchen, the scent of her lavender perfume still lingering in the air. The silence was unbearable. But I knew there was one last thing I needed to do, one last duty as a husband and a father. I had spent the last decade preparing for this moment, the reading of my will. But I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. My son, my only child, Michael, sat across from me at the lawyer's office with a smirk on his face. A smug, rehearsed expression that didn't belong at a moment like this. He thought he knew what was coming. He thought he had already won. What he didn't know was that I had written a second letter. A second envelope, sealed, hidden, and meant to be opened only after the first. It held the truth. And that truth would shatter everything he believed he was entitled to. The funeral was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from respect, but the kind that wraps itself around a room when people don't know what to say, when guilt, shame, and secrets hang in the air like thick smoke. I stood by Margaret's casket as friends, distant relatives, and old neighbors passed by, offering half-hearted condolences. They didn't know the full story. Most of them hadn't seen us in years. And truthfully, they didn't know my wife, not the woman she became in those last months, when the weight of our past finally began to surface. But Michael. My son. He stood across the room like a stranger. Dark suit, polished shoes, perfectly timed expressions. He greeted guests with a performance, as if he were playing the role of grieving son on some stage. There were no tears in his eyes. Just calculation. I watched him from a distance. His movements were too precise. His smile too careful. I knew that smile well. He used it on clients, investors, the boardroom. It was the smile he wore when he thought he had outsmarted everyone in the room. And now, he wore it at his mother's funeral. Margaret had warned me. In her final days, when the pain made her speak truths she'd long buried, she said, "There's a part of Michael the first don't recognize anymore." Neither did I. As the ceremony ended, and the casket was lowered into the ground, I felt a strange detachment. Not from grief, but from those around me. The people I once called family felt like strangers. Especially the one who shared my last name. I knew then that the funeral was not just for Margaret. It was for the illusion I had carried for years, the illusion that Michael still had a good heart. That day, in the quiet hum of fading prayers and shifting dirt, something in me died too. But something else awoke. A week after the funeral, we gathered in the law office of Gregory Bell, my attorney for over 25 years. It was a modest building, red brick, tucked between a florist and a bakery downtown. Familiar. Comfortable. But that morning, the air inside felt heavier than usual. The conference room smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The long table in the center bore witness to years of family estates, divorces, business disputes. Now, it was our turn. Michael arrived exactly on time, as expected. He never liked being early, it made him feel like he was waiting on others. He walked in wearing the same dark suit from the funeral, freshly pressed, expensive, lifeless. Beside him was his wife, Clara, who barely made eye contact with me. Her silence over the years had become her signature. Gregory greeted everyone calmly, though I could sense a hint of unease in his eyes. He knew what was inside the envelopes. He knew today wouldn't go the way Michael expected. Other relatives were present too, my late brother's widow, a cousin from Margaret's side, but they were background characters in Michael's mind. In his world, there were only three real players, himself, the money, and me. He sat down across from me, gave a slight nod, and leaned back in his chair like a man already counting his inheritance. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't mention his mother. Instead, he looked at Gregory and said, "Shall we begin?" There it was again. That smirk. That subtle, arrogant curl of the lip that said, "I've already won. Just get to the part where I sign the papers." I said nothing. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my mind. Gregory opened the folder and cleared his throat. He began with the usual formalities, reading the will's introduction, verifying the date, the signatures, the witnesses. My heart beat slower. I wanted Michael to listen carefully, to catch every word. Because what was about to unfold wasn't just a legal procedure. It was a reckoning. As Gregory read the opening lines of the will, I didn't look at the paper. I looked at Michael. He had that look again, that slight, confident grin tucked into the corner of his mouth. Like a man watching a chess game he thought he'd already won 10 moves ago. He crossed one leg over the other, folded his hands neatly in his lap, and tilted his head ever so slightly, as if to say, "I told you this would be easy." I had seen that smile before. When he closed his first major deal at 25. When he negotiated the sale of our family's lake house, without asking me first. When he persuaded Margaret to transfer some of her investments into one of his schemes, which mysteriously disappeared a year later. That smirk was his armor. His disguise. He believed the money was already his. The house, the land, the stocks, the antiques, even the watch I wore on my wrist. He had calculated everything. In his mind, I was just the old man who had finally stepped aside. And maybe, in some ways, I had. For too long. But today was different. He didn't know about the long nights I spent rewriting the will. About the letters Margaret left behind, filled with sorrow and regret. He didn't know what I had discovered after her death, things she had kept hidden to protect him, and to protect me from the truth. As Gregory turned the page, Michael's smile widened, just slightly, when my estate was formally introduced. The residence at 1847 Ashgrove Lane, the attached property, the 1968 Mustang in the garage, the vintage collection of first edition novels. His eyes sparkled like a boy opening birthday presents. But he wasn't listening to the details. He was simply waiting for the final line, "And to my son, Michael Walker, I leave." I could almost hear him finish the sentence in his own mind, everything. But what he didn't realize, what his arrogance blinded him from seeing, was that Gregory hadn't even reached the true part of the will. And that smirk? That would be the last time he'd wear it in that room. Gregory adjusted his glasses and paused briefly before continuing, long enough for everyone in the room to feel the shift. The room grew still. Even the soft hum of the ceiling fan seemed to quiet down. Then, he began. "To my beloved son, Michael Walker," Gregory read aloud, "I leave the following." Michael straightened in his seat. His eyes flicked toward me, just for a moment, as if expecting a nod of acknowledgement. There wasn't one. The sum of $25,000, to be issued in monthly disbursements of $1,000, for the duration of 25 months. The room froze. The words hovered in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. Michael blinked. Once. Twice. Then he gave a forced laugh, glancing toward Gregory like it had to be a mistake. A typo. A cruel joke. "I'm sorry, what?" he finally said, his voice sharp, not loud, but strained at the edges. Gregory cleared his throat again. "That's what the will states. 25,000, dispersed over 25 months. Michael looked at me now, his smirk long gone. "This is some kind of punishment, isn't it?" he asked. "After everything I've done for this family?" I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted the silence to say what words could not. The will continued. "All other assets, real estate, investment accounts, valuable possessions, and holdings, are to be donated to the Margaret Walker Foundation, an organization established in my wife's memory, dedicated to providing education and shelter to women who have suffered domestic abuse and financial abandonment." Gasps rose from the relatives. Even Clara's composure cracked, her mouth slightly parted in disbelief. Michael was stunned, paralyzed. He looked as if the chair beneath him had disappeared. I had built that foundation in secret, in Margaret's honor, after reading her final journals. After discovering the silent sacrifices she had made. The money she gave, the emotional wounds she carried, all to hold our family together. And now, every dollar I had would go to protect the kind of women she once fought for. Michael's voice was colder now. "You're giving everything to strangers?" I looked him in the eye for the first time that morning. "They were never strangers, Michael. Not to your mother. And not to me." Gregory closed the folder slowly, his voice calm but final. "That concludes the official contents of the will." Michael sat motionless. No smirk. No words. But then. Gregory reached under the table and pulled out a second envelope. Unmarked. Sealed. "This," he said quietly, "is to be read next. Per Richard's request." The moment Gregory placed the second envelope on the table, the room changed. Not physically, nothing moved, but the atmosphere itself seemed to tighten, like the walls had leaned in closer, holding their breath along with everyone else. Michael's face was unreadable now. Not angry. Not shocked. Just frozen. His eyes locked on the envelope, as if staring at it might force it to disappear. No one said a word. My cousin shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Clara's hands trembled slightly in her lap. One of the younger relatives cleared his throat, trying to break the tension, but the silence swallowed the sound before it even reached the walls. Gregory didn't rush. He looked at me, and I gave him a small nod, barely noticeable, but enough. Then he carefully broke the seal. The crisp sound of paper tearing felt louder than it should have. It felt sacred, like opening something that was never meant to see daylight. But I had written those words to be read. Not just for Michael. For all of them. Gregory unfolded the letter and began reading aloud. To those in this room who once called me husband, father, uncle, friend. If you are hearing this, it means I've already left this world. But I have one final truth to share. One that I can no longer keep buried beneath politeness, tradition, or the weight of silence. Michael flinched. Not dramatically, but enough that Clara noticed. Her eyes flicked toward him, curious now. Or maybe suspicious. The letter continued. This truth is not about inheritance. It's not about money. It's about character. About wounds that were ignored. And about the line between success and destruction. Michael shifted in his seat. I watched as the people in that room leaned in, not out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, the anticipation of revelation. Of judgment. Of something raw and real. I had spent a lifetime keeping the peace, biting my tongue, hoping things would work themselves out. But I knew now that silence is not always kindness. And this letter was going to speak louder than I ever could. As Gregory read the letter, his voice remained calm, steady, almost too steady for what was coming next. He paused midway through the page, then looked up and reached once more into his leather briefcase. There is one more item, he said, his tone quieter now, more reverent. Your father left behind a second envelope inside this letter. A personal message. Addressed to Michael only. Michael's eyes started toward me, and then back to the envelope Gregory now held in his hand. It was small, yellowed with age. Not a standard legal envelope, this one was handwritten, sealed with wax. A deep red seal. The kind no one uses anymore. On the front, in my careful, aging script, were just 3 words, for my son. Michael hesitated. His hands, once so confident, didn't move. Gregory gently slid the envelope across the polished table until it rested right in front of him. No one breathed. Michael finally picked it up, as if it might burn him. His thumb hovered over the seal. Then, with a slow, reluctant motion, he broke it. He unfolded the paper. He read the first line. And then something shifted in his face. A crack, not physical, but emotional. Like a wall giving way under pressure. His lips parted slightly. His jaw tensed. His eyes no longer searched for answers, they began to reflect something closer to shame. Would you like me to read it aloud? Gregory offered, gently. Michael didn't speak. He simply handed the letter back, unable, or unwilling, to say a word. Gregory began again. Michael. If you're holding this letter, it means the truth has found you. Whether you're ready or not. You were once a little boy who held my hand and asked me if heroes were real. I told you they were. I told you that men could become heroes by protecting those who were weaker, by telling the truth even when it hurt, and by living with honor when no one was watching. I still believe that. But somewhere along the way, you stopped believing in it. And I stopped reminding you. Every eye in the room was now fixed on Gregory. Michael sat still, but something inside him was shifting. The smirk was long gone. What remained was the face of a man finally seeing himself. And not liking what he saw. And the letter had only just begun. Gregory continued reading, his voice soft but unwavering. The room was silent, every pair of eyes now fixed on the unfolding words, words that were no longer just mine, but a mirror held up to the man my son had become. You stopped calling me Dad the day you turned 30. That was the same year you told your mother that love was transactional, that loyalty was just a word weak people used when they had no leverage. Do you remember the night she cried in the kitchen, after you left? She told me she had failed you. But I told her the truth. I did. I let you walk down a path of cold ambition because I thought success would eventually soften your heart. I believed you needed to win to feel whole. I was wrong. Michael, success without integrity is a mask. And yours has been slipping for years. Michael's breathing grew heavier. His jaw twitched. He didn't try to interrupt. There was nothing to say. You took from this family in silence. Little things, at first, access to accounts, business decisions made in back rooms. Investments disguised as gifts. Your mother forgave you more times than I can count. She hoped, God, she hoped, that one day, the little boy who loved bedtime stories and held her hand in parking lots would come back. He didn't. And when she got sick, do you remember how many times you visited? Once. You brought flowers. Took a call during dinner. Left before the nurse arrived. She never said a word. But I watched something break in her that night. Not because you were busy. Because you didn't care." Michael's eyes were red now, but he refused to wipe them. He was too proud to cry, but too human not to feel. "You always said you wanted what's fair. So let me be fair now. I am not punishing you. I am setting you free. Free from the inheritance you assumed was yours. Free from the lies you told yourself. Free from the weight of pretending to be a man you're not. If there is anything left between us that can still be salvaged, it must begin with truth, not with money. I pray that one day, you'll understand this. Not as a rejection, but as a final attempt to reach the little boy who once believed in heroes. I still believe in him. With hope, not anger. Your father. Richard." When the letter ended, no one spoke. Michael sat there, his hands limp in his lap, the letter resting like a verdict before him. The room had no more space for pride, no room for argument. It wasn't just the will that had been read. It was the truth. And it echoed louder than any inheritance ever could. Just when the silence seemed to settle like dust on old furniture, Gregory took a quiet breath and opened a small, aged file folder that had been sitting untouched at the corner of the table. "This," he said, almost in a whisper, "was given to me by Mr. Walker 3 weeks before his passing. He instructed that it only be revealed after the second letter was read." He slid a single photograph across the table. Faded. Black and white. A hospital room. In it, a much younger Margaret sat in a wheelchair, holding a newborn. But beside her was not Richard. It was another man. Michael stared at it, confused at first. Then defensive. Then, something else entirely. Disbelief. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. Gregory looked directly at him. "The man in that photo is Daniel Mercer. He was your mother's first love. You were born shortly before she and Richard were married." Michael's breath caught. I leaned forward. "I raised you as my son," I said gently. "I never once saw you as anything less. But the truth is, biologically, you are not mine." Gasps filled the room. Clara covered her mouth with both hands. A cousin whispered a stunned "Oh my God" under her breath. Michael looked at me, blinking hard, shaking his head slowly, as if trying to erase the moment like words on a chalkboard. "She never told me," he whispered. "No," I replied. "Because I told her not to." Flashback. I had discovered the truth 5 years into our marriage. Margaret confessed it to me on a rainy November evening, tears in her eyes and guilt soaking her every word. She thought I would leave. But I didn't. Because by then, Michael had already called me Daddy 100 times. He had fallen asleep on my chest. He had hugged my knees when I walked in the door. Biology couldn't change the fact that I had loved him from the moment he entered my life. But love wasn't always enough to guide him. Or protect him from himself. And now, in this moment, he was realizing something no amount of wealth could undo, that the man he had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and discard was the man who had chosen to raise him, knowing the truth. That secret, hidden for a lifetime, had not been meant to punish. It had been meant to protect. Until now. Michael looked down at the photo, and for the first time in decades, I saw the expression of a boy again. Lost. Broken. Small. And for the first time, he didn't have a single word to say. Michael didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the photograph in front of him, like it was a map to a place he no longer knew how to return to. The confident, curated man, the one who walked into that room so sure of his inheritance, his control, his superiority, was gone. What remained was someone unmasked, unprepared, and, perhaps for the first time in his life, vulnerable. I had seen that face before. Not on the man who sat across from me now, but on the boy who used to come running into the kitchen after scraping his knee. The one who once cried when a bird died outside his window. The boy who asked if he would still be loved if he made mistakes. And now, he was finally asking that question again. Without words. Clara sat rigid beside him, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. She didn't try to comfort him. Maybe she was still processing. Or maybe she, too, had seen through his mask for the first time. I leaned back in my chair, not triumphant, not angry, but tired. Deeply tired. Tired from years of silence, of hoping he would change, of grieving a son I never really lost but who had slowly lost himself. Gregory closed the folder and rested his hands on it like a final benediction. "There are no further documents," he said quietly. Michael finally looked up at me. His face wasn't angry or bitter, it was hollow, like someone staring into a mirror they had spent their entire life avoiding. "You knew all this time?" he asked. I nodded. "Since you were 5. And you? You still raised me? I didn't raise you out of duty, Michael. I raised you because I loved you. But I won't enable who you've become. Not anymore. His lips trembled, and for the briefest second, I thought he might cry. But then, his shoulders slumped, and something inside him deflated. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was denial. Or maybe it was the beginning of something new, humility. The room was silent again, but this time, the silence wasn't cold. It was sacred. The kind that comes after a storm has passed. After everyone left the room, awkward handshakes, murmured goodbyes, sidelong glances, only Michael and I remained seated. The envelope lay open. The photo, the letter, the silence between us. All real now. No more illusions. No more games. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And I didn't offer it, not because I didn't have it in my heart, but because I knew it would mean nothing if it came too soon. Some wounds need time. Others need proof of change. I don't know who I am anymore, Michael finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. That's not a bad place to start. He let out a shaky breath, half exhale, half regret. All this time, I thought I deserved everything. No one deserves an inheritance, I said. It's not a reward. It's a responsibility. And I couldn't trust you with that responsibility, not yet. He looked at me. Not with defiance. Not with entitlement. With something new. Awareness. Do you think it's too late? He asked. I thought about Margaret. About her journals. Her quiet suffering. Her fierce hope. And then I thought about the foundation. The real legacy. You can't change who you were, I said slowly. But you can decide who you want to be from here. He looked down. Then nodded. Just once. That was enough, for now. Weeks later. The Margaret Walker Foundation opened its first transitional home for single mothers in the city. The dedication ceremony was small, intimate. Michael attended. Not as a speaker. Not as a sponsor. But as a volunteer. He arrived early. Wore a simple shirt. Carried boxes. No press. No speeches. Just effort. He didn't announce himself as my son. He didn't introduce himself as anyone important. He just served. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I saw a glimpse of the boy who once asked me if heroes were real. Maybe. He was becoming one. Not because of a will. But because of a choice. We don't get to choose how we're remembered. But we do get to choose what we leave behind. For years, I thought my legacy would be measured in dollars, in deeds, in things people could hold or pass down. But in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth I refused to take to the grave. What mattered was choosing honesty over comfort, integrity over silence. And what mattered most was giving the next generation a chance to rise, not because they inherited power, but because they earned purpose. My son may never become the man I once imagined he'd be. But he's becoming someone better, a man who knows how much he still has to learn. And who's finally willing to listen. If you've made it this far in the story, maybe you're carrying something too, a silence, a truth, a decision you've been avoiding. Let this be your sign. It's never too late to do what's right. To tell the truth. To change. Or to forgive. And if this story moved you in any way, if it made you think about your own family, your own legacy, your own definition of what truly matters, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this to come, real, raw, and rooted in the things that make us human. Until next time, live truthfully and love bravely.